Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to peel back the layers of history to get to the origins of ancient Greece. And it's a story you might think you know, but trust me, it's packed with these brilliant beginnings, a really mysterious collapse, and then a totally remarkable rebirth.
So let's just jump right in with the simple question. Before we had the iconic Parthenon in Athens or those legendary Spartan warriors, what was even there? Well, the answer actually takes us out to sea. You see, the story of Europe's first great civilizations doesn't start on the Greek mainland at all. Nope, it starts out on the islands and the shores of the Aegean Sea, with two really powerful but also really different early cultures. And the contrast between these two is just fascinating. On one hand, you've got the Minoans, living on the island of Crete. Their palaces were wide open, their art was super vibrant, and it often featured women, all signs pointing to a pretty peaceful society built on trade. Then, you've got the Mycenaeans over on the mainland. They built these massive fortified citadels. I mean, their whole focus was clearly on war. And get this, the Minoan palace at Knossos was so huge and complex, with all these different levels and confusing corridors, that it became known as the Labyrinthos. And yeah, this is exactly where we get our word labyrinth. It was even the mythic and home of the terrifying Minotaur, the half-man, half-bull creature.
So here's a really key point. While the Minoans were this incredible civilization, they probably weren't actually ethnically Greek. The Mycenaeans, on the other hand, they were the very first wave of Greek-speaking people to show up in the region, and they basically set the stage for everything that came next.
But just as these civilizations were hitting their peak, they just suddenly collapsed. And what came next was this long, mysterious period of silence that historians now call the Greek Dark Age.
Just think about that for a second. From around the 12th century to the 8th century BCE, the historical record in this entire region essentially goes blank. For almost 400 years, it's like a whole chapter of history was just ripped out.
So what do we mean by a dark age? Did the sun get blotted out? Was it a time of, unending gloom? Not exactly. The reason historians call it that is actually way more specific, and it has everything to do with something that was lost. Here's the heart of the issue. It's called dark because they literally forgot how to write. The skill was completely lost. And when you don't have written records, you don't have history, you just have archaeology. The story of the people, their laws, their poems, their deals, it all just vanished into thin air. So what could cause a collapse that catastrophic? Well, a second wave of Greek-speaking tribes, especially the Dorians, came sweeping down from the north, and they brought with them a devastating new military technology. Iron weapons. These things just shattered the old bronze swords of the Mycenaeans. Cities were burned, palaces were torn down, and in a very real way, civilization itself just got a hard reset. But after 4 centuries of silence, a new light starts to appear on the horizon. And surprisingly, it comes from the east. This moment is the true dawn of what we now call ancient Greece. The absolute game changer, the piece of tech that ended the Dark Age, was the alphabet. And they got it from the Phoenicians, these seafaring people from the coast of what's now Lebanon. It was simple, it was efficient, and it was super easy to learn. And with this simple new tool, the Greeks could finally write things down again. Their laws, their stories, their history. The 400-year silence was broken. The Dark Age was officially over. And rising from the ashes of that old world, a completely new way of organizing society popped up. The polis. Now, we translate it as city-state, but it was so much more than that. It was like its own independent community, a tiny nation all to itself. And we're not just talking about Athens and Sparta here. At its peak, the Greek world was made up of as many as 1,100 of these fiercely independent little city-states, each with its own government, its own laws, and its own unique identity. Now, most of these city-states had a similar two-part structure. The easiest way to picture it is kind of like a pudding on a plate. Seriously. First, you've got the high city, the Acropolis. That's the fortified hill with all the temples to the gods. And then down below it, you had the Agora, the flat, open space where all of public life happened. The marketplace, political debates, you name it. Okay, so this brings up a crucial question, right? If you have over 1,000 independent city-states, and they're often at war with each other, how on earth did they ever start to see themselves as one people, as Greek? Well, they did it by creating a really powerful sense of us versus them. First off, they didn't call themselves Greeks, they called themselves Hellenes. And everybody else, they were the barbaroi. Why? Because to Greek ears, foreign languages were just this unintelligible noise that sounded like bar, 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 bar. And yeah, that is exactly where we get our word barbarian. This shared Hellenic identity was really built on three big pillars. First, a common language. Second, a shared group of gods and sacred spots like Delphi, where people from all over the Greek world came to hear prophecies from the famous oracle. And third, these huge pan-Hellenic, which literally means all Greek, competitions. And the most famous of these was, of course, the Olympic Games. It's so important to remember that the Olympics weren't just about sports. They had this profound political and social goal to get all the constantly fighting city-states to just put down their weapons and come together, to reinforce that shared identity as Hellenes. And that brings us to a really powerful final thought. The original games were literally invented to create unity among warring peoples. So how is it that in our modern world, the Olympics can sometimes become a stage for political fights and national rivalries? It's a fascinating thing to chew on, how the whole purpose of an ancient institution has been turned on its head over time.